Let's be honest here, riding the London Underground is nobody's favourite pastime. It's hot, it's cramped, it's busy, you've got to deal with overbearing arseholes who take up 2 entire seats all to themselves, as well as drunken idiots passed out in a puddle of their own piss at 9 in the morning. Oh wait, that's just me. But when it's late at night and you're standing alone on a desolate underground platform wishing your train would hurry the fuck up, the place takes on a whole different character, and you begin to realise there's something fundamentally weird and creepy about this strange subterranean world of dark, foreboding tunnels and abandoned tube stations. In short, it's a great location for a horror movie. The 2000s saw the release of the movie Creep, which effectively exploited that sense of being trapped alone in the darkness with something very nasty indeed. But there's another movie that came out more than 30 years earlier which did the same thing, only much better. Deathline, or Raw Meat for American audiences. Seriously, who the fuck changes a movie from Deathline to Raw Meat and thinks it's an improvement? Anyway, whatever, the point here is that it's a neat little 1972 horror movie starring Donald Pleasance and Christopher Lee about a series of grisly murders and disappearances taking place in underground tube stations. Clearly, there's a killer at work here, but who or what could be behind it? The film begins with a pair of college students on their way home late one night when they happen upon an unconscious man crashed out on the floor. Now, anyone who's travelled on the tube late at night can tell you this isn't exactly a rare event, but whatever. They go off to get some help, but when they come back, he's vanished. Whatever could have happened to him? Because the missing man happens to be a public figure, a police investigation is soon launched and suspicion falls on the two students. Fuck knows why they'd bother to report the man they'd apparently murdered, or what they did with his body, but I don't know. The point is that they have to try to clear their names by figuring out what's really behind this. Meanwhile, the detective in charge of the case begins to suspect there's something more sinister at work than a robbery gone wrong. And when the female student gets abducted one night after being separated from her boyfriend, the race is on to find and save her before she becomes the next victim. But what exactly are they trying to save her from? If I had to define Deathline as a concept, I'd say it's a combination of slasher movie and monster flick. The driving force behind the plot is a series of murders and the race against time to put the pieces together before more people go missing. But like any good monster movie, the real draw of the story is the antagonist itself, and I think this is where Deathline really shines through. The man, as he's referred to in the credits, is probably one of the most unique characters I've ever seen in a film like this, managing to be both monstrous and pitiful at the same time. At first you don't see much of him, he's just this dark, ominous figure lurching through the shadows, moaning incoherently and lashing out at anyone who crosses his path. He's a bit like your average Glaswegian on a Saturday night. But as the movie progresses and the story sheds more light on his circumstances, you begin to see him in a whole different light. It begins with an urban myth about a tunnel collapse at the turn of the century, which trapped a bunch of Victorian workers deep underground. They were presumed dead at the time and the tunnel was abandoned, but it turns out that some of them survived, sealed away in a dark underground world, and forced to resort to cannibalism to stay alive. And as the generations passed, they slowly degenerated into a primitive animalistic state. Again, like your average Glaswegian on a Saturday night. The man is the tragic endpoint of this lost culture, basically representing humanity boiled down to its most depraved and simplistic elements. He shambles around in filthy clothes inherited from previous generations, living in the filth and squalor of his underground world, and only occasionally venturing up into populated sections to hunt. He doesn't have a name, and he can't even communicate in a meaningful way. The one and only piece of dialogue he's able to say, probably without even understanding its meaning, really drives home how disconnected he is from the rest of civilization. And yet, despite all of this, there's tiny shreds of humanity still in there somewhere. He's visibly distressed when his last remaining companion dies, and when he takes a woman captive, he tries in his own limited way to care for and communicate with her. It's a scene that's both disturbing and kinda tragic at the same time, and I have to give big props to the actors here for making it work so well. There's nothing quite as dirty and gritty as a low-budget 70s horror flick, and Deathline is a perfect example. It's a world of grimy, starkly lit tube stations, cheap sterile offices, and dark, dingy tunnels, and the claustrophobic atmosphere really starts to weigh on you after a while. You hardly ever get to see the outside world, and on the few occasions when the action moves somewhere a bit more comfortable, it comes as kind of a shock and an absolute relief. You've gotta love that 1970s hair though. Fuck me, did women get their hair cut in vending machines back then or what? I'm a big fan of visual storytelling in movies like this, and Deathline has got a shit ton of it. Like the long continuous shot of the man's lair, showing you the decomposing corpses of previous generations carefully laid out on bunk beds, conveying so much about what's going on down there without a single line of dialogue. It's great stuff, and it really adds to the impression that way more thought and care went into this movie than it probably needed. Donald Pleasance is always entertaining as an actor, and he's fucking great here as the cantankerous detective Calhoun. He's gruff and abrasive with most people, especially anyone of a higher social class, but beneath it all, there's a sharp, analytical mind that's determined to get to the truth. I also love the fact that Christopher Lee shows up for like 3 minutes in a scene that's totally unnecessary to the plot, basically because he wanted to work with Donald Pleasance, so they just said, fuck it, he's in the movie. What's even more insane is that Marlon Brando was originally supposed to play the man, and it's only because of a family emergency that he had to drop out at the last minute. Damn, the mind boggles at what this movie could have been. Anyway, regardless of what it might have been, the fact remains that Deathline is a really cool little horror movie that turned out way better than it had any right to be, and considering you can watch the whole thing on YouTube for free, I highly recommend it if you're in the mood for a bit of old school horror to while away the long October nights. But just remember to... Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.